Hi, everyone, and this is the video lesson for the makeup in week 3. Okay, and today we're going to talk about using visual aids and body language and presentations and signposting language. So these are the 3 main topics that we'll cover. I'll give you some tips. You'll have a chance to watch some videos that are related to this, and I imagine some of this is review for you, but yeah, I hope it is helpful. Okay. Right. So, um, in terms of visual aids, there are different types, as you're probably well aware. Of course, text on slides is a visual aid. Graphs and charts, okay. Numbers, of course, and statistics. The use of color, images. More and more we see some videos or GIFs. You can also, in the modern age, use whiteboards during the time of the presentation, you can draw or um, bring up illustrations and things like that, okay? So you have a choice of different kinds of visual aids to incorporate into your presentation. And, the question is, how can they be useful? Well, obviously, part of the big thing that I think is important in presentations is that they engage your listeners. And so an attractive presentation visually, appealing design does help to engage the audience as compared to a presentation that just has text or possibly no visual aids at all. And yeah, sometimes, if you think about PowerPoints that just have text, it is a bit boring and off-putting for some people, especially young people nowadays don't like to read as much. So visual aids can spice it up a little. One of the main purposes, obviously, of visual aids is to support what you're talking about in your presentation, okay, and to enhance the understanding of your audience. And keep in mind that there are those who don't necessarily learn well from text or just listening. And so, we call them visual learners. And yeah, visual aids can help them to better understand your presentation as well. Okay, so in terms of visual aids, there are some problems and pitfalls that you have to be careful about. Okay. Um, Visual aids can be distracting. Okay. Your main kind of goal in a presentation is for the audience to pay attention to you and what you're saying. And so if there are visual aids that distract the audience away from that, not as effective, right? If the visual aids are not clear, it could be confusing. The audience is trying to figure out what the visual aid is trying to communicate. Think about putting a small graph on your slide, and the audience is trying to discern what is, but it's quite small, right? And so this can be confusing for the audience. Uh, they'll be spending time trying to figure out what the visual is communicating and not paying attention to. And of course, if there's irrelevant visual aids not really related to what you're saying, then that's kind of strange, right? It takes the audience's mind off topic, and again, perhaps attracts their attention in ways that are not related to the goals of your presentation. Okay, so be careful about using cat videos and GIFs and things like that in your presentations if they're not relevant. The last thing is to be careful about overwhelming your audience in terms of, the busyness of um, the visual aspect of your slides, right? If you have lots of different visuals on one slide, it's difficult for the audience members to figure out what they're supposed to be focusing on while you're talking. Okay, so generally try to keep it simple, right? Or at least clear. Highlighting certain visual at certain points, if you're good at PowerPoint or something like that, is one way of approaching that. But yeah, try to keep it simple. Yeah, don't crowd a slide with lots of visuals. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is to pause this movie, so to speak, this video, and go to this TED Talk. It's about 10 minutes long. And I'd like you to do is to watch it and think about how this speaker uses visuals and try to evaluate how effective his use of visuals is. Okay. So as I mentioned in my message, I've also sent this PPT. And so the easiest way, I suppose, you could either just go directly to Google and enter Aleph Molinari TED Talk or something, or you can, if you haven't already, open up the PPT and then you can just click on the link that'll take you to the talk. Okay, so pause this video, watch the presentation, put down some notes about things you noticed about how the speaker has used visuals. Okay, and we'll talk about it after you come back. So pause the video, please. Okay, so now that you're back, now that you've watched the video, let's discuss, sort of a general evaluation of the speaker's use of visual aids. Okay, so you notice that the slides are pretty clear, right? Quite simple in terms of the color element, black background, yellow font. So it's quite easy for the audience to read any text. Okay. Yeah, not a lot of text on the slides. Okay, so that's good, right? The majority, there are a few slides that have a little more text, but the majority have just a few words on them. And uh, although you don't necessarily have to follow that, but it does keep it simple, as I mentioned, right? There are photographs on some of the slides, okay? And these photographs do in some way connect with the content of what the speaker is saying. So that's good, in terms of appealing, and people like photographs, generally images that relate. Yeah, generally the information on the slides, the audience can follow that information, those visuals, can absorb them quite quickly, like, just one statistic on a slide, okay? Um, and that's important for an audience to be able to do. If it takes them longer to absorb information from a visual, then they might not be paying attention to you for very long, right, as you speak. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you have their concentration more when the visuals on a slide can be quickly understood. And of course, this problem of the audience reading a slide instead of listening to the speaker. Right? Okay. So yeah, a pretty good job by the speaker. There are other aspects, of course, that we could critique. The speaker's voice is a bit flat, a bit monotone. Some of the eye contact of the speaker is not optimal. Could be better eye contact as well. But in terms of visual aids, yeah, it's a pretty good job. And it's not the only way to do it. But there's some good principles in use here that we could emulate to a certain extent. Okay. So let's just go through, some of this again as review, some of the do's and don'ts in terms of using visual aids in your presentation. In general, okay, as a general principle, think about the audience and what effect a specific visual aid or aids will have on the audience, okay? So this relates to the size of the visual effect or the color, how quickly or easily they'll be able to understand. You have to put yourself in the shoes of the audience. And in some cases, it does require you to give it a try and go into a classroom and sit at the back of the classroom and look at your PPT and get a sense of, okay, for people at the front, it's okay, but people at the back, maybe not so good, right? So do think about the audience and different places in the audience and how big the space is where you're giving the presentation. This, audience comes first, right? They're your focus. Generally speaking, you have to go for a large size font. Okay, it says minimum 20 point, but of course, I usually go bigger, up into the 30s. That also forces me to cut down the amount of text that I use if I'm using a bigger font, which is a good thing to do. Okay. As I mentioned in the feedback in your presentations before, there sometimes typos show up, and this is a bit embarrassing, especially for a university professional or aspiring professional. So do check and double check, triple check for typos, get someone to look it over. Okay. It can be a little embarrassing and it can undermine your authority, even though there's simple mistakes. Speaking of simple, as I mentioned, try to keep the visual aspects simple, um, and don't overcrowd slides, uh, giving the audience lots of information and difficulty to understand what to focus on. Okay. Um, Animations and videos are good, but be careful. Just do make sure that they're appropriate, that they're relevant to the content, that they enhance the audience's understanding. This comes back to the purpose of visuals, right? Do think about, why you might be using something like a video and whether this particular video achieves that purpose for the audience. And yeah, also be careful that you don't show too long a video, right? They're not there to watch videos. They're there to, listen to a presentation, follow your presentation. So videos can enhance presentations, definitely, but they shouldn't take over the presentation either. And finally, be sure to be consistent in terms of your slide design or visual design. Try to be consistent with the font and the way the titles on your slides look, the layout, the general layout. And for example, your approach to capitalization. Look at this slide, right? Notice that I'm using capital letters for all the bullet points at the beginning. Okay, so but if you start like sometimes capital, sometimes not, it looks a bit strange. It's doesn't give a positive impression to the audience. Okay, so look out for that consistent design. Of course, you can use tools within PowerPoint and other thing to achieve consistent design, but it's also up to you to check that and make sure the colors are consistent as well. Okay. In terms of don'ts, as I mentioned, avoid lots of text on slides. Try to avoid generally sentences or especially long sentences. Try to see if you can make them points or just a few words, right? Because you want the audience to listen to you. And if there's text, then it kind of supports what you're talking about, but don't try to give them everything you're talking about. Give them sort of a main idea, and then they have to listen for the details or the supporting ideas and the examples and stuff like that. Okay. As I mentioned, be careful about how busy your slides are visually. If necessary, split your slides into a number of different slides with a visual on each slide instead of crowding one slide with several visuals. It's difficult for audience members to understand usually what to focus on as they're listening if there are multiple visuals on a slide. Be careful about, this is kind of related, but if you spend a lot of time on one slide, then the audience's attention is generally going to wander. Okay, this is just the nature of people. Moving from one slide, transitioning from one slide to the next does kind of catch our attention, right? There's movement. And if you spend too much time on one slide, then this lack of movement will result in some audience members losing attention or their mind will wander and stuff like that. So keep that in mind. Yeah, it's better to split up your presentation into perhaps a few more slides instead of very few slides. This varies, of course, but do keep that in mind. Yeah. If you do have these kind of kind of bland, plain slides with just bulleted lists, bullet, 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 and each slide doesn't look very different from the next. This is also kind of boring for the audience and not very appealing and perhaps even sometimes difficult to follow, right? So try to, obviously bring some interesting aspects to different slides to differentiate them, that kind of thing. Yeah. Um, yeah, in terms of font type sizes or colors, be careful. Like a little variety is okay, but not a big variety. Size of font, obviously, in terms of your headings and your subheadings and your text, I think that's important to have different sizes, like on this slide, right? But and notice I've used red. Okay, and that's not necessary, but it does, make a slightly different change. But again, be careful about overdoing this variety. Limit yourself to a small variety of these aspects. Okay, so these are some do's and don'ts in terms of visual aids. You might want to revisit your slides from your presentation in class last week or this week if you're listening to it this week. And in terms of these do's and don'ts and some of the stuff we've talked about, try to think, well, to what degree you're following this, to what degree you would revise some of these slides. Keep in mind you might use a slide or two from this presentation in assessment one or assessment two. So it could be worthwhile to revisit them from a visual point of view. I gave some feedback during the class to individual students. You could also use that feedback, in terms of making modifications to the visual aspects of your slides or your presentations. Okay. Right, so let's move on to body language. And, body language is a type of communication. It's a bit unconscious. We don't necessarily pick up on all the body language, but even unconsciously, it does communicate things to us, okay? And when we talk about body language, this communication goes through the face, right? Facial expressions, the eye contact, gestures, okay? Um, Movement of your body and the position of your body where you're giving your presentation, and also the posture, how you're holding your body while you're talking. And we're going to talk about each of these in turn, okay? And why they're important, yeah? So in terms of facial expression, um, we communicate a lot of emotion through our face, okay? And it's through our mouth in terms of whether we're smiling or frowning, kind of a neutral kind of expression. The eyes, it really makes a big difference, okay, in terms of how bright your eyes are or how dull your eyes are, in terms of the emotion that the audience picks up from you. And even eyebrows, okay, the movement of the eyebrows, whether there's some activity going on or not, okay? These are all aspects. And the audience, through your body language, does pick up on, through your facial expressions, does pick up on emotions. And one thing I want you to really remember, okay, is that if your face communicates boredom, then the audience is going to pick that up and they're going to feel kind of bored. It's just emotions are transmittable, they're contagious, so to speak. However, if your face is animated, if your face, your eyes are bright and your mouth, I'm not saying like you're smiling like really brightly, but kind of like, you're happy to be there in a sense, then the audience will pick up on this emotion as well. Okay. So do try to avoid this facial expression of very serious and perhaps even like bored kind of nature. I've seen it a lot on students' faces, I'm afraid, when they give their presentations. Okay. So yeah, facial expressions is one aspect to think about. And perhaps you need to stand in front of a mirror or film yourself and just kind of get a sense, okay, what's actually going on with my face during the presentation? Eye contact. You've all heard about the importance of eye contact, okay? And it's the idea that if you pay attention to the audience through your eyes, through looking at them, then they're likely to be paying attention to you. But if you don't look at them, then there's something unconscious about humans where we don't pay much attention when we don't get that eye contact. It's an interesting thing, and perhaps there's an evolutionary basis to this for thousands of years, but it's kind of a proven fact, right? That when presenters don't use eye contact, then audience doesn't pay as much attention. Okay, so do make sure that you're, obviously not all the time. You can look at the screen and uh, and refer to parts of the presentation, but look more at the audience and at audience members. Okay, so look less at the screen. You can look sometimes, but obviously not a lot. Some people, when they speak, their eyes go up to the ceiling. Just not sure whether they're trying to remember or recite. If there's a computer and you're standing behind the computer, heaven forbid, then some people will look at the computer too much and lose the audience's attention. Notes, right? Notes are okay to use, but if you were just looking at the notes too often, some people are using their phones nowadays and putting the notes on their phones, and then a lot of their eye contact is going towards their phone. That's a bit off-putting as well, you know? And just something to be careful about, especially in a classroom. Some people do tend to focus their eye contact more on just the teacher in the classroom. And they forget about their classmates, okay, and looking at their classmates. And as a result, the classmates, they pick up on this and then they kind of stop paying attention. They're kind of like, oh, the speaker's just talking to the teacher. It's not for us. I don't need to pay attention, right? But if you actually engage your classmates through eye contact, yeah, they're more likely to pay attention. There's no guarantee, right? Okay. So do try to use contact, for the audience in general, and you shift your eye contact to different parts of the audience, different sections, different audience members, yeah, and it does make a difference. It's quite important, but it takes some practice. Gestures, right? When we think of body language, this is one of the things that comes to most people's minds. It's not the only aspect of body language, but it is important, okay? When we talk about gestures, we're talking about hands and shoulders, shrugging, for example, yeah. And also the head, the positioning of the head, right? You can ask a question and kind of like tilt your head, right? There's different ways of gesturing with your head. Um, I suppose there are some species that can use their ears, right, for gesturing and communicating, but I'm not sure. Perhaps some humans are good at that. Wiggling their ears, we say. Right. So hand gestures especially can be used to communicate meaning and reinforce meaning. So, obvious examples are numbers. There's one main reason, right? Or there's three, first reason, the second reason, the third reason, that kind of thing. That's really obvious. But one thing to think about is, when you practice your presentation, try to think of instances where you can use your hands to support meaning or to emphasize a certain meaning, like something is round, right? Or how big something is, the world, right? Okay, or you, right? You all. So think about opportunities to use gestures, and then once you think, okay, then you can practice incorporating these specific gestures, and you can put them in the note of your PowerPoint slide or something like that to remind you. All right, so gestures that communicate meaning and connect directly with what you're going to say or with something on the screen. Okay, that's another kind of gesture, right? Pointing at something on the screen to highlight it if you don't have the remote with the red light, the pointer. Okay, can be quite helpful to the audience and incorporate some movement. Yeah, and by the way, movement is quite an important aspect of gestures. I hinted a little earlier about movement, and humans have evolved to pay attention to movement. Just because for millions of years we lived in nature, and any kind of movement in nature was important to pay attention to because it could be a danger, it could be a snake, right down there. There's movement, get out of the way. Or it could be something we could eat, right? Something running away and we chase after it. So we evolved to pay attention to movement. Uh, as a result, movement in a presentation helps to engage the audience. If someone is talking and not moving, whether it's through, body language or, as I'll talk in a minute, actually moving your body, then if you stay still in one place for a long time without much movement, your hands at your sides, you're kind of stiff, then people will lose attention fairly quickly. Okay. And that's kind of the way we've evolved as well. Okay. We don't pay attention if there's no movement. Just on a side note, there are classrooms similar to our classroom where there are kind of windows, right, on the side of the classroom, and students pass by in that. And this is actually quite distracting, right? It's very difficult for students and the teacher to focus on what's going on inside the classroom. If there's movement outside, just outside the range of our vision, it kind of attracts our attention, this constant movement. So from a pedagogical point of view, teaching point of view, it's not optimal often to have glass classrooms. Okay. So, anyways, movement. Gestures are a type of movement, and they do attract attention and keep attention. More on movement. As I said, movement attracts the attention. And so, in terms of your position in in the classroom or in the presentation hall or whatever, do consider the possibility of moving from time to time, whether it's to one side of the screen, the other side of the screen, coming a little forward, moving a little back. Not like constantly frenetic, moving a lot, that's distracting, but from time to time, shifting your position. Okay, because this movement does attract attention. If you are standing in one place without any movement, then there's a greater chance the audience will not, their minds will wander. They won't be focused on you so much because there's no movement going on. Okay. So look out for that. Try to think about when or how you might move during your presentation. Hopefully it'll come naturally eventually, but perhaps you need to, if it doesn't come naturally, plan it or practice it. Okay. And in terms of that position, do try to reduce the distance. Now, it could be physical distance, it could be emotional distance. From a psychological point of view, if someone's standing behind a desk or standing behind a computer, the audience has more difficulty connecting with them from a psychological and emotional point of view. Okay, so it's really kind of important, I feel, that you get a remote, whether you borrow one from the teacher or have your own, and that gives you the freedom, right, to get away from the computer where you have to press the button to advance slides or whatever, and gives you the mobility within the class or within the presentation space. And I think this makes a difference to the audience. Yeah. I remember I actually gave a presentation on this for teaching, and I was in Turkey, and I was up on a stage, and at some point I jumped off the stage down to the audience, and they were like, "Whoa!" And believe me, it caught their attention. And it was the topic of my presentation as well, so that kind of highlighted. But afterwards, people came up and said, "Wow, that I never thought that a teacher could do that." And it really got their attention, and really it was memorable. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying you can do that all the time, but bringing yourself a little closer to the audience does make a difference. And people who might not be paying attention, if you move closer to them, then they naturally, oh, okay, I'm paying attention. They naturally will refocus on you. Okay, so keep that in mind. Close the distance, physical, emotional, psychological, between you and the audience to a certain extent. Okay. Right. Finally, in terms of body language, posture is an interesting phenomenon, right? How you hold your body and how you hold your arms is, unconsciously communicate certain things to the audience, and specifically, the degree of confidence that you have when you're giving the presentation. We tend to pay more attention to confident speakers, as opposed to people who are a bit self-conscious and really nervous. A little nervous is okay, but really nervous. And so in terms of posture, which postures can really communicate confidence? So what I'd like you to do now, just as we did before, I'd like you to pause the video. And there's quite a useful TED Talk by Amy Cuddy about body language and posture when you're speaking, okay? And so you can either search on Google for Amy Cuddy for her TED Talk, or you can refer to the PowerPoint that I sent and click on the link. And I'd specifically like you to answer this question, okay? What does Amy Cuddy mean by high power poses and low power poses, okay, in terms of posture and speaking? Okay, and note down some of her advice that she gives, and I think it's quite useful, yeah? So pause the video, have a watch, and take notes, and then there's going to be a little quiz after that. I'll see you in a minute, or more than a minute. Okay, so here's a little quiz, a Kahoot quiz. So you can either scan the QR code and do it on your phone, or you can open up the PowerPoint and click on the link, or you can go to kahoot.it and enter the PIN. And there are a few questions about Amy Cuddy and about her presentation and about power poses and confidence and how to communicate that as a speaker. Okay, so again, pause the video and do the quiz and check your understanding of the points that you got from Amy Cuddy's talk. Yeah, okay, about posture. Okay, we're back. I hope that was useful. We're going to do a quick summary at the end, okay? But let's move on to our final topic for this video lesson, which is signposting language. Okay, signposting are words or phrases that speakers use to guide listeners. You probably are aware, right, that when you're listening to a speaker, it really helps if they support your journey through the talk. Just listening to something without any guidance can be a challenge. It takes a lot of focus, right? So if listeners have some way to that helps them to guide them through, okay, in terms of different sections and different points and what to pay attention to, like emphasis and things like that, then it makes a big difference. Okay. And it can also help the audience make connections, right? What's been said before, what's coming next, that kind of thing. And it's generally easier to follow if you use signposting language effectively. Yeah. Just as a side note, I didn't give a lot of feedback on this, but in terms of what I noticed in your presentations in general, was there were some issues with the use of signposting language. One issue is repetition. Okay, some people were just kind of repeating certain phrases throughout their presentation. Of course, we're talking just short presentations. It's only supposed to be 2 minutes. So there's not a lot of repetition, but there was in some cases repetition, okay, of using sort of a stock phrase that the student liked. Another kind of thing I noticed was the use of words like so or also, again, kind of repetitively, right? But quite simple ways of signposting, not very effective in a way. It doesn't really guide the audience a lot. It's okay to use them sometimes, but the overuse is a bit of an issue, especially at the university. These quite simple signposts are, you might want to upgrade, right? Especially if you're giving a presentation at the PhD level. Yeah. And then, of course, there's other issues about the clarity. If signposting is supposed to guide listeners, and if listeners are not exactly sure what you mean when you're using certain language to guide them, that can be a problem. Could confuse them. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there's always room for improving. This signposting, and so let's look at ideas related to that. So again, pause the video, and This is, a fairly useful, comprehensive video about using signposting language. And what's nice about it is the speaker breaks up the signposting language according to different purposes and different stages, but not a lot. So I don't feel it's overwhelming, right? But what I'd like you to do is just listen and note down, some examples, some phrases of signposting language for different stages of a presentation, especially any phrases that you feel you connect with, that you feel you would like to use. Okay. Um, Now, obviously, you're not going to use all of them, but yeah, watch the video, pause this video, go to that video. Again, in this case, you're going to have to probably just use the PPT I sent you. Okay, and yeah. Note down some useful signposting language. Okay. Okay, so now that you watched that video, hopefully you've got some examples, some useful phrases to help you to improve your signposting. Here's another Kahoot, here's another quiz, okay, on using signposting at different stages of a presentation for different purposes, yeah? And go through it. Pause this video and do the quiz. Keep in mind for this particular quiz, in most cases, more than one answer is possible. So take your time. There's no time or anything. So take your time. Look at the different responses. Consider what's possible. Yeah. Okay. And again, just to remind you, it's something you could revisit as well. Yeah. Okay. And then I'll be waiting for after you finish. So, besides the actual words and phrases that you can use for signposting, here's some advice in general about using signposting language. It's good to use a variety, okay? As I mentioned, repetition is not as effective. And so, but it takes practice. And so when you're rehearsing a presentation before you give it, then try practicing different types of, linking or referring back or introducing language. Okay. But in general, we strongly recommend that you don't script, you don't write out your presentation, right? And so this is also true of signposting language, right? Some students think, oh, that's a great phrase. I'm going to write that into a particular script, and then I'm going to memorize it, and then I'll use it. But generally, things that you script come out kind of unnaturally. It's just, unless you're a trained actor who's good at reading scripts, right? And not very many people are, okay? Try to avoid scripting signposting language and just practice it. And so that when you come to a certain stage of your presentation, then one or two phrases will hopefully, because you've practiced, you've rehearsed, these will come just naturally to your mind with practice. And over time, of course, then you become a more skilled presenter, and these phrases that people use, that good presenters use, will come naturally to your mind for specific purposes of your presentation, such as introducing and referring back and that kind of thing. Yeah. But one thing you could do instead of scripting is for certain slides, you could put, there's a notes section for PPTs, for example, that the audience doesn't see, right? So you could potentially just put down a signposting phrase or something or two in the notes section of slides where you want to remind yourself that there's some signposting language that you want to use here, whether it's illustrating or transitioning to something else, right? So you could put it in the notes. It sort of depends whether you'll see that because it's generally on a computer. Some people might use an iPad or a tablet as they're walking around and talking and advancing the slides with that, and then they can see it. That's another approach, right? But again, try to avoid scripting your presentation. We'll talk more about that, but it's really something that can really kill the audience's attention and appreciation of a presentation. Okay. So that's some advice. Right, so we're basically at the end of the video lesson, and here's just a quick summary of some important general principles. Okay, so in terms of visual aids, right, there's lots of different things to think about, but in general, your selection and use of visual aids should be with the audience in mind. Okay, so consider what effect a certain visual aid will have on the audience. You know, how will they perceive it? How will they understand it? Um, will it confuse them? Will it engage them? Will it put them off? Can they see it? Right? Is it, you know, in terms of a video, right? How will they perceive it? Okay, will they understand? Do you need to set up the context? Right? So in general, as a presenter, um, we need to think about the audience, okay? And this is, we'll talk about this in terms of content as well, because one of your goals is to give a presentation to non-specialists in your major, right? So people who don't know your topic, how can they better understand your topic without using certain technical language or, so thinking about your audience is very important in this case, right? What do they know or might know, and what do you really need to explain, or what do you need to avoid because it's just too detailed and beyond their comprehension in that limited time. So anyways, audience, presenters think about their audience and try to get to know or try to get a sense of who their audience will be and what knowledge they have about the topic. But in terms of visual aids, what effect each visual will have on the audience, okay? In terms of body language, okay? Body language, of course, we can communicate meaning, but the main thing about body language is the emotion, okay? It's a primary tool to engage the audience. It's not the only tool, and we'll talk more about different tools. Visual aids is obviously an engagement tool as well. But body language is quite important because it's person to person, right? And this emotion is more important than you might realize, okay? Maybe because you haven't seen it, I don't know, in a lot of presentations, or especially teachers, sometimes they lack it, right? And you know, maybe university, oh, we're supposed to be so serious. But I think it's crucial to incorporate emotion into your presentation. Now we'll talk more about passion and interest and how you can communicate it through your voice and things like that, okay? But body language is one way to do that as well. And so do try to practice incorporating more body language into your presentation within limits, of course. Okay. And finally, signposting. There's lots of different phrases, you know, gambits we call them, that you can memorize. But the key thing is to practice a variety, okay? So that you're not repeating the same one all the time, that just naturally with time, certain phrases will come to mind for certain purposes, okay, in your presentation. That way you can avoid using simple transitions and signposting language, or just repeating yourself or being unclear. Yeah. Okay. So it does take practice as well. You can book a speaking assistance program in the ELC and practice a presentation, whether for this class or for other classes, and get teachers' feedback on different aspects, especially on the signposting. Okay. But it does really help support listeners in terms of following where you're going in a presentation. Okay. So that's about it. I hope that was useful. We'll be revisiting these points, and in terms of your feedback to your peers for assessment one, some of this, you know, you could give feedback on, right? But yeah, this isn't, these are quite important points. Some of it I hope is review for you, but I hope I've given you some useful insights in terms of how to improve these aspects of your presentations of your skills in becoming an effective presenter. Yeah, and we'll work on them. We'll develop them throughout this course, and hopefully then you can continue beyond the course and improve them as well. Thanks very much, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Yeah, thanks.